The little girl stood alone in the middle of the millionaire's glass office, holding a plain brown envelope with both hands. Her backpack was faded, her shoes were dusty from walking several blocks, and her yellow shirt looked like it had been washed too many times. Across the polished conference table, millionaire Darius Whitmore leaned back in his chair and laughed. "You came all this way just to return an envelope," he thought, amused by what seemed like an impossible story. But Darius had no idea that the envelope in that child's hands contained something worth far more than money. He also had no idea that within minutes, the person who truly owned it would walk through his office doors and reveal a secret that would change the lives of everyone in the room. Before we begin, if you believe kindness and second chances can change someone's life, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner 2.0. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this to you. It was a bright Tuesday morning in the heart of Brookhaven, where sunlight poured between tall buildings and reflected across the windows of Whitmore Holdings. The company occupied the top floors of a modern glass tower, and everyone inside knew its owner, Darius Whitmore, as a man who had built his fortune from almost nothing. At 42, he was wealthy, respected, sharply dressed, and known for making decisions without hesitation. Employees admired his intelligence, but many quietly believed he had become too distant from ordinary people. That morning, Darius was sitting in a private conference room reviewing a major business proposal when his assistant, Maribel Crane, entered with an unusual expression. She explained that a young girl was waiting downstairs and insisted that she had something important to return to Mr. Whitmore personally. Darius initially assumed it was some harmless misunderstanding. His company received countless letters, packages, and business documents every day. Still, something about the assistant's tone made him curious. A few minutes later, the girl was brought upstairs. Her name was Leora Bennett, and she was 11 years old. She stood quietly near the doorway, clutching a brown envelope against her chest. Her straight chestnut hair was tied into two simple braids, and a small blue backpack hung from her shoulders. She looked nervous, but there was something remarkably steady in her expression. Darius looked at the envelope and then at her. He asked how she had gotten it, and Leora carefully explained that she had found it near a bench outside a community library earlier that morning. She had been walking there before school because her mother worked nearby, and sometimes Leora waited at the library until classes began. The envelope had been lying beside the bench, partially covered by a newspaper. She had noticed a name written across the front, but instead of opening it, she had decided to bring it somewhere safe. The return address was the Whitmore Holdings building, so she had come there hoping someone could identify the owner. Darius took the envelope from her and examined it. His expression changed slightly. The envelope was old, but the handwriting on it was familiar. His own father had used that handwriting. Darius had not seen it in years. His father, Everett Whitmore, had died 7 years earlier. Their relationship had been complicated. Everett had been the man who originally built the foundation of the Whitmore family business, but before his death, he had left Darius with one final message: wealth meant nothing if you stopped noticing people who had less than you. Darius had heard those words countless times and eventually pushed them aside. Now he stared at the handwriting on the envelope. He asked Leora if she had opened it. She immediately shook her head. She explained that her mother had always taught her that something belonging to someone else was never hers to take, no matter how valuable it might be. She had not even looked inside because she believed the right thing was to return it untouched. Darius gave a small laugh. He wasn't laughing at her exactly. He was laughing at the strange coincidence and the seriousness with which this tiny stranger had treated an old envelope. He told her that perhaps she had discovered something more important than she realized. Leora simply looked at him and said that she did not want anything for returning it. That answer made the room unusually quiet. Darius had become accustomed to people asking for something whenever they approached him. Investors wanted funding. Executives wanted promotions. Strangers wanted favors. Even acquaintances often wanted connections. Yet this child wanted nothing. Maribel, standing near the door, noticed Darius staring at the envelope with increasing concern. He carefully opened it. Inside was a single handwritten letter and a small brass key. The letter was addressed to Everett Whitmore. Darius read the first few lines and felt his confidence disappear. The letter had been written by a woman named Celine Hartwell, someone Darius vaguely remembered from his childhood. She had worked with his father when the company was still small. The letter explained that years earlier, Everett had promised to establish a private education fund for children from struggling families in Brookhaven. The fund had been created quietly, but after Everett's death, its records had somehow disappeared. The letter said that the brass key would open a safety box containing the original documents. Darius stared at the key. He had never heard about any education fund. Then he noticed something even more disturbing. At the bottom of the letter was a sentence explaining that the fund had been intended for families who had been helped by Everett during the company's earliest years. One of those families was Leora Bennett's. Darius looked at the girl. He asked her mother's name. When Leora answered, Darius froze. Her mother was Nadia Bennett. Nadia had worked at a small bakery near the Whitmore factory years ago. Darius suddenly remembered his father visiting that bakery almost every Friday. Everett had once told him that Nadia was one of the most hardworking people he had ever met. Darius had never understood why his father cared so much about her family. Now the pieces were beginning to connect. He asked Maribel to search the company archives. Within minutes, old records began appearing on her computer screen. There had indeed been a charitable education account established by Everett. But according to the company's official records, the account had been closed shortly after his death. The money had never reached the families it was intended for. Darius felt a heavy silence settle over the room. Someone had taken it. He looked again at the envelope Leora had returned. The real mystery was no longer why she had found it. The mystery was why Everett's letter had disappeared for 7 years and suddenly appeared on a library bench. Before Darius could say anything, the conference room doors opened. An elderly man entered slowly, supported by a wooden cane. His name was Gideon Mercer. Darius recognized him immediately. Gideon had been his father's longtime financial advisor. He had also been the person who managed the company's charitable accounts after Everett's death. Gideon looked at the envelope. Then he looked at the brass key. His face became pale. Darius stood. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Gideon finally admitted that Everett had trusted him with the education fund. He explained that after Everett's death, several board members pressured him to move the money into another corporate account because they believed the charity was unnecessary. Gideon had refused. But before he could protect the fund, he discovered that documents had been altered and the account emptied. He had spent years trying to uncover the truth. The letter in Leora's hands was the missing evidence he needed. Gideon explained that Everett had secretly kept the original records in a safety box because he suspected someone inside the company might try to steal the money. The brass key was the final piece. Darius suddenly understood why his father had never told him. Everett had feared that his own son, still young and ambitious at the time, might ignore the problem rather than fight powerful people inside the company. Darius looked at Leora. The girl had unknowingly returned the one thing that could finally expose the truth. Gideon then revealed something even more emotional. Nadia Bennett had once received a scholarship from Everett that allowed her to finish her education. She later became a teacher and spent years helping children in the same neighborhood. Leora had been raised with those values. Darius realized that his father's kindness had traveled through generations. And now it had returned to him through an 11-year-old girl carrying a worn backpack. Darius immediately ordered an independent investigation into the missing charity funds. He also instructed his legal team to reopen the Education Foundation using his own money while the investigation continued. But Leora still stood quietly near the table. She told him that she only wanted to make sure the envelope reached the right person. Darius smiled. He told her that she had done much more than that. She had reminded him of something he had forgotten. Money could build towers, companies, and impressive offices. But integrity was built in much smaller moments. A few weeks later, the investigation confirmed the truth. Several former executives had redirected millions from Everett's education fund. The money was recovered through legal action, and the foundation was restored. Darius named it the Everett Whitmore Learning Foundation. But he added one special rule. No child would ever need to know the foundation's name to receive help. Applications would be judged quietly, without attention to family status, clothing, or wealth. Leora became one of the first students supported by the renewed foundation. Her mother received assistance as well, allowing her to reduce her working hours and continue teaching part-time. Darius also began visiting the community library where Leora had found the envelope. He never arrived with cameras or publicity. He simply sat with children, listened to their dreams, and remembered the lesson his father had tried to teach him years earlier. One afternoon, Darius saw Leora sitting outside the library reading a book. He asked her if she still remembered the envelope. She smiled and said that she remembered being scared when she walked into his office. Darius laughed softly and admitted that he had been the one who should have been nervous. Because the little envelope had carried a message he desperately needed to hear. Sometimes, the person who walks through your door with nothing is the person who brings you something priceless. And sometimes, kindness doesn't arrive wearing an expensive suit. Sometimes it arrives in a faded backpack, holding an old envelope with both hands. Years later, Darius would still keep a photograph of that envelope on his office desk. Not because of the money connected to it, but because it reminded him of the day an 11-year-old girl taught a millionaire that honesty was worth more than every number in his bank account. Leora never became famous. She never asked for recognition. She simply returned something that wasn't hers. And somehow, that small act of honesty returned something to everyone else too: hope, justice, and the chance to believe that doing the right thing still mattered. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to Kindness Corner 2.0. Your support helps these stories reach more people who may need a little hope today. And before we end, here is a special request. Comment, "Kindness always returns," if you believe that one honest act can change someone's life. Because sometimes, the greatest treasures aren't the things we receive. They are the values we choose to give away. And that morning, when Leora walked into a millionaire's office holding an old brown envelope, she didn't know she was carrying a fortune. She was carrying a second chance.